If you're watching this video, there's a pretty good chance you're a fan of the map Upward. Personally, I'm not its biggest fan, but my favorite map is Mountain Lab, and I main Spy, so now I got this weird mark on my Steam profile. Anyway, Upward is very popular, probably only behind the likes of Dust Bowl and Two Fort. It's well liked for its generally open spaces, being fun to play on as most classes, and especially rocket jumping. Even an Upward doubter such as myself can't deny just how ridiculously fun it is to just jump around on this map. Flying around at Mach 10, experimenting with different... never mind, this map sucks! What's going on here? Well, first, let me introduce you to a good friend of mine, the Clip Brush. We met at a bar, I swear. These are invisible, solid blocks that have a near infinite amount of uses. Put simply, they're what's used to stop you from going places you shouldn't, getting stuck on various props, falling into weird holes. He's a good friend, I told you. This is a TF2 map as you think it is, and this is a TF2 map as it really is. There are a few really common use cases for these that I'll talk about first though, to make sure you appreciate what mappers go through to make these things. First is something I don't think people think about all that much, smoothing out props and geometry along walls and such. Almost every indoor location in TF2 has walls that are riddled with little poles and props that help detail the map, but if unclipped, these can be disastrous for gameplay. You don't want to be in the middle of a fight and get stuck on some tiny board you could barely see. Thus, almost all of these bits are smoothed off with clip brushes. A mapper's job is not only to make a place to play the game, but to make a gameplay space that is free of interruptions that halt or disrupts the flow of gameplay. With TF2 being as mobility focused and action packed as it is, you want to make sure that any map is completely smooth, ensuring you don't randomly get stuck on something you couldn't quite see or didn't think you should get stuck on. Another much more commonly known form of clipping is what I'll call boundary clipping. These are typically massive walls used to keep you from breaking outside obvious boundaries around the map. Most of these are exactly what you'd expect. Take something like these fences on Mountain Lab, the walls around Dust Bowl, or this wall on Upward which keeps you from jumping between the first and last point areas. But fly through this wall here and what's going on here? These little fences, one of which you could probably jump on as any class, have huge towers of clipping brush above them, cutting the cliff line here in half, all the way up to the top of the map. In fact, a lot of the outer perimeter of this map is chopped up by these same fence props. It makes a bit of sense though if you think about it, since if you wanted to keep players off these fences, no form of sloping brush would work due to being able to stand on its ridge. You'd have to either use a massive clipping brush or a type of brush that forces the player off, the latter of which generally isn't used in official maps. Well, except for one special place. Moss Rock is a beautiful map with perhaps more foliage present than any other. These kinds of trees in particular boast unique shapes, some of which allow you to perch on top of them. Most of these are pretty harmless and work well in gameplay, but some are in some tricky spots which could allow for some undesirable gameplay. And instead of simply clipping them off, the map maker, Freya, opted for push boundaries, which push you off the tree should you try to get onto them. One tree in particular, dubbed the Boomerang Tree by my friend deroplat, is pretty easy to fling off as any class. I've tried many times to shoot myself off at a spy and get the elusive boomerang stab on an unsuspecting player, but have been unsuccessful. It's pretty damn hard. If you're able to pull it off in game, be sure to @ me on Twitter and I'll retweet it on my Twitter account that you should definitely follow. That was like a tongue twister there, twit. Crazy. Anyway, I'd apologize for the tree-based tangent, but it's a bit of fun trivia, and if you're as nerdy as I am about this game, you probably kinda eat that stuff up. Back to clipping, there's a ton of weird clipping jobs on pretty much every map, but if you want to search yourself, use this command to turn on these big pink boxes and just take a look around whatever map you want. As an easy example, here's that bit on Barn Blitz which lets you stand on thin air by the first point. Using this command, it's pretty easy to find some new routes that might just help you out one day or some fun perch spots. As for the main topic today though, I want to talk about stairs and inclines, one of the most important uses for clipping out there. If you've played enough TF2, I'm sure you've encountered this exact situation at least once. You're hopping around, going up some sort of incline or approaching a bump, and are stopped completely in your tracks. It kinda sucks. It isn't a super common occurrence on most maps, but like I said earlier, it's imperative that these kinds of interruptions are smoothed out, so as to prevent the case where someone does get completely tripped up by the map to no fault of their own. And also, if you remember, this is almost the exact same thing that happened earlier on these upward stairs. To demonstrate the importance of proper stair clipping, let's go to one of the most egregious examples in the entire game, this staircase in Snowplow. Granted, it's in a spawn room, so it doesn't matter nearly as much, but it's a good case study. Notice what happens as I slowly crouch walk up these stairs. My screen jolts up and down with each step. Granted, while running this isn't nearly as much of a problem, but take a situation where you're running back into spawn, jumping and dodging to avoid damage to get some health. It could be rough, and it's the exact kind of thing you want to avoid with any staircase as a map maker. Meanwhile, right beside it is a beautifully clipped set of stairs. Just to look at it being perfectly flush with the upper and lower floors, it's gorgeous. Another key difference between these two sets of stairs, however, is that these ones on the right are props, and the stairs on the left are made of world geometry. To put it simply, think of the difference between something you can't put a spray on and something you can. World geometry staircases are especially important to clip, as their clipping is exactly as they appear, no nonsense involved, meaning that any lack of clipping can result in the dreaded clip jump. Props, however, behave a bit differently. They typically come built in with their own unique clipping separate from the world. Oftentimes this works just fine, meaning you can slide up and down them as you please without any fear of clip jumping. However, this does not mean that prop-based stairs do not need extra clipping brushes applied to them. Make that mistake and you end up with our not so good friend, the stairs on upward. Because these stair props are aligned directly against world geometry here, there's a good chance that the top of the stairs and the top of the world geometry won't perfectly align, creating the tiniest change in elevation between the two with no smoothing, acting essentially as a tiny version of what we saw on Snowplow. Just this tiny bit of difference is more than enough to completely stop a rocket jumping soldier in their tracks. On a map as focused on mobility as upward, I see this as a mild catastrophe, a truly unforgivable crime, I'll be honest. The solution is pretty simple too, just a basic clipping job will fix any problems with any set of stairs, world geometry or prop. What confuses me about upward especially is that this problem isn't consistent. There are prop-based stairs that are clipped properly with brushes. These ones inside the cave, just fine. Right outside red second spawn, all good. Even these ones inside the tunnels by last and the cliffside by third are all set. But arguably some of the most important parts of the map that feature these stairs are completely unclipped. Of course, I'm being a little petty here. This isn't the end of the world, and I'm making a big fuss out of something so easy to miss for comedy's sake. When you embark on a project as monstrous as an entire finished TF2 map, it's easy to forget random things like this. So, I want to make it clear, I mean no shade to the hardworking community members who worked on... Val, what the hell is this? Why in God's name are these stairs clipped in these dank-ass tunnels off on this tiny piece of cliff, but not here or here? Absolutely perfect locations for soldiers to jump onto and get some sick market gardens like in that one video I made a bit ago, you should watch it. And hey, here's something I initially wasn't going to complain about because I thought Upward was community made and I didn't want to pick on a community member too much, but because it's Valve, let me introduce you to this monstrosity. This is a classic case of what I call first stair syndrome. Here's another example, also on Upward, of a healthy staircase. It's clipped all the way to the top and bottom, taken all of its immunizations, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, this is a corrupt bastard child that the Source engine has dealt with for decades, in which the clipping created for a staircase completely misses the bottom step. This seems really petty, and I get to be petty, it's Valve, they completely silenced players who don't pay money for like 3 years now, free-to-play players still can't talk, that's a problem. But this particular instance is actually an issue. This is the last point of the map, and the difference between getting stuck in this tiny missed clipping job and successfully retreating into cover could easily mean life or death, and thus a won or lost game. Granted, first stair syndrome is absolutely everywhere in TF2, almost every map has it somewhere, so I'm not saying Upward is particularly awful with its clipping, it just has some pretty notable examples. And I think it's a good way to kind of get people into thinking about this kind of thing. It's a very niche topic, it's only really something I've paid a ton of attention to and probably not many other people, but hey, learning more about the game you love is a fun time, and you know what? It's a lot easier to talk about than something as complex as weapon balance. It's just interesting. There's a lot more things you can do with stair clipping mechanics and Source though, way more than I discuss here, so after this video I really recommend you watch these two videos by 3 Clicks Philip if you haven't. They're about CSGO, but cover some pretty universal Source mechanics in really interesting ways. So definitely go check them out if you haven't. If you don't do it, I'll know, and you'll be sentenced to clipping hell, aka that one weird spot in Junction.